Hello, everyone. Welcome back. Thank you so much for being here. Today, what we're going to be talking about is the different dimensions of ableism in society. Okay, so I know you know a lot about this channel. We talk about education research. I have a PhD in special education. So I'm going to talk a lot about disability, special ed, but also other topics in education, right? But today, and in a series of videos, I'm going to talk about ableism in different dimensions. So today we're going to talk about ableism in society. Okay, so actually, why don't we start with talking about disability? So, what is disability? Disability is a physical or mental condition that substantially limits one or more of a person's major life activities. So, life activities can be walking, eating, sitting, running, playing, reading, that could be writing, tons of different things, right? So, that is a definition of disability. But some people may say, okay, when does a difference become a disability? So actually, this definition is from the book by Baglieri and Shapiro. It's called Disability Studies and the Inclusive Classroom. I had to read it for one of my classes in my doctoral coursework. So these authors rather said a difference becomes a disability when people with particular characteristics are not able to access life opportunities and experiences as a result of inaccessible contexts or other barriers related to the perceived difference. Disability then as a condition defined by an interaction, not only in a body. So, wow, that's very multi-layered. So let's just talk about this right here. So you become disabled in society when you don't have access to different life opportunities and experiences, such as buildings, such as transportation, such as work, schools, right? Like just relationships, etc. A lot of times in society, if you have a disability, you are disabled because of those things, right? Because a lot of environments are inaccessible to you, right? And then also, this causes a lot of barriers, tons of barriers in society where there are not a lot of things that you can do to overcome them, right? So tons of barriers when it comes to healthcare, when it comes to jobs, when it comes to getting around, renting places, owning homes, right? So many different things in society, right? So this is where I can be different from someone, right? I can maybe walk different. Maybe I'm walking in a cane versus another person is walking, on their two legs or walking with a limp. Those are differences that we have, but it becomes a disability when that difference disables us. Basically, we don't have access to different experiences and opportunities in life because of those differences. So it's not just the body that is so-called seen as disabled, it's now the interaction that you have with people, with society. So we're going to talk a lot more about this. So as you know, like I said, I have a PhD in special education, and myself, I've had to interrogate my ableism, right? And somewhat internalized ableism. And we're going to talk a little bit more about that dimension, but how I then position myself as a so-called able-bodied person, so-called able-minded person, teaching students with disabilities. And one thing that's a constant, everyone will get a disability in their lifetime, right? So I've had temporary disabilities where I've had injuries through working out or playing a sport. And the impact of that was insurmountable, much less someone having a more permanent disability. And also, when you get a disability in life, if you're born with one versus if you get one in 40 or 50 or 60 or 70 is totally different because you've been used to having access to many things, having opportunities where you're not discriminated against, right? So your interaction with disability will change. And also, if you have a so-called visible disability versus an invisible disability, right? So I've had a lot of interactions with children with disabilities, family members with disabilities throughout my career. But what I want us to focus on now are the different dimensions of ableism. So what is ableism? Ableism is discrimination against people with disabilities, It is the persistent devaluing of disability of the belief, or the belief that disability is inherently negative state of being, right? So how does society perpetuate this? They perpetuate this on different dimensions of ableism. Actually, I attended a talk where this is from a slide from Race Forward. They were talking about racism when it came to this slide, but actually, I think it's very transferable to when it comes to thinking about people with disabilities. So let's just look at this a little bit more. So when you think about the internalized, a lot of people, these are the symptoms of the macro of ableism, right? So this is the internalized, what you think about yourself. This is what lies within the body, right? These are things that are private thoughts that come inside your mind about your ableism. So whether you think that you are superior to others, that's also internalized ableism, right? Or whether you feel inferior because you may have a disability, or you may be seen as less than because you don't have that access to society, right? So this internalized ableism lies within. Those are the private beliefs, right? And you can pass this on to people, and you can pass this on also too as well. You can mask certain things because of internalized ableism. And then also, when you have to think about smartness, who's considered smart, we have to interrogate, obviously, ableism and disability to begin with. But examples of internalized ableism may be prejudice, internalized oppression and privilege. You have privileges because of this ableist society being so, maybe seen as gifted, or maybe seen as so-called typical developing or neurotypical developing, right? And then this society, buttresses your beliefs, right? This society was made for so-called able-minded, able-bodied people, and we had to have laws, federal laws in America, to be passed to, in some ways, mitigate those barriers that people with disabilities have. So that's a huge thing that we have to think about and always talk about. Everyone will get a disability in their lifetime. So whatever ableist beliefs that you have about other people, someone will have that about yourself, right? Because you will in some ways get a disability in your life. So you have internalized ableism where you have internalized ableism where you in some ways feel inferior because you have been positioned in society, if you have a disability, as being less than. You've been disenfranchised, disempowered, and you have deprecating beliefs about yourself, self-defeating behaviors, right? And then you have internalized superiorities, internalized ableism, and which can lead for you to be thinking of yourself in a superior manner because you've been empowered. Like, I can go anywhere without really many barriers. I can, travel, I can get a job or have education, and I don't have to necessarily feel like I'm less than in a classroom or less than in society because no one is questioning my ability, right? In some ways. So you can have superiority because of that. Like, oh, look at these lowly people who have to, the bus has to stop and roll out the ramp to have them roll in, and you then in some ways pity people, right? You're patronizing. And that's another video. We're going to talk about microaggressions, disability microaggressions. So you have many different things that you may be encountering because you have been positioned in society that you are superior to others, right? And that's institutional power, right? Those are invisible advantages that you don't realize unless you are impacted by disability in your lifetime, right? So I remember I had a surgery some years ago on my knee, and I was living in a building that did not have an elevator. It was just a walk up, right? So obviously, if you are in a building like that, you have to live on the first floor, right? So I was living on the top floor, and it was just so taxing, right? It was just a moment in my life, only 6 weeks of my life, where I was in some ways disabled because I didn't have access and opportunities to go different places or do different things because I was on crutches and on a cane, right? But that's just a moment in time. But what if your lifetime was like that? Or what if you're so used to, like myself, being able-bodied, able-minded, and then all of a sudden you're impacted by disability? How then that changes your perspective, right? So that's just like the internalized. But then because of the macro of ableism, you then start let me just change the screen. You start then doing it to other people. So you are now perpetuating interpersonal ableism, right? So you are transferring that internalized and perpetuating it to other people. So you see this a lot in society where you see folks in classrooms. That's going to be another video talking about ableism in schools, where people are taking their private beliefs and then impacting other people with those beliefs, those interactions with others, right? So I remember, growing up, like I used the example before on, riding public transportation on the bus. You have people who see someone in a wheelchair and they all of a sudden don't get on the bus because, they'll be delayed, or they get off the bus and start walking, or they hiss their teeth and they're, why do we have to wait for this person? But somebody that's going to end up on you one day, because someone is going to be hissing their teeth because you're walking too slow on the street, right? Or you're driving too slow. Goodness gracious, I drive too fast. Don't tell anyone. Right. No, I drive within the speed limits. Okay. All right. Thank you. But there's going to be something where you're doing something not as fast or not as productive as someone else. And someone else is going to be, doing that to you. So those are things that we do, the interpersonal stuff. And then oftentimes what we as society, we always think about the internalized and the interpersonal, but we don't think about the structural elements of ableism and institutional elements. And those are really the things that are out. Some people argue that's even more impactful than the interpersonal. So, but some other examples of interpersonal, like say, for instance, you spread anti-ableism, right? You don't want to have a particular type of person working for you or working within your company, or you express, certain biases or prejudices or hate or bigotry towards people with disabilities. Or like, say, for instance, if you have a child with ASD and you see this child in the street and they're having a tantrum or having some type of an issue, right? And then you just, hiss your teeth, or you chastise that mother or father or parent and say, that couldn't be me, or, and then you tell your child, like, you better not act like that child, and negating that child may have particular issues that are out of their control, that, they're acting this way because of, right? Or you just don't take time for other people. You don't give leeway, you don't give grace to other people in your interactions because you have certain ableism that you're going through. But another dimension, like I was saying, probably some people will argue this is probably the most impactful, you would say, is the institutional. This is the institutional racism, rather, not racism, but ableism. But we can also talk about the intersections, because we're not talking about intersections today, because that would be another video, because there's many intersections between all the isms. If you're a male, if you're Black and you have a disability, you have a totally different experience than a female, white, with a disability, or, rich or poor, so everyone has different experiences within disability. But the institutional is really deadly, right? And the structural. So the institutional occurs within institutions. So whether it's policies or practices within a school, within a government, within police, within hospitals, prisons, media, religion, social media, all these things, these are unfair policies and practices that lead to insurmountable effects on people with disabilities, and also affects people without disabilities, because then you internalize, like, I'm better, I'm in a gifted class, I can do this job because I'm able-bodied, right? I can have this position because I'm able-bodied. Like, if I'm a person with a disability, and oftentimes opportunities have been barred from me and I didn't get the best education or the best resources, I could be regulated in a capitalistic society as a janitor, versus someone else who has gotten tons of education and opportunities could be the doctor, right? And all of us are acting, or actors in this institution where institutional ableism can exist. Like, you're regulated to make a certain amount and be in a certain position because you didn't have access because of those institutional ableism that you've experienced in society through the school system, prisons too as well. Very, very, very important This is a really good book, Disability Incarcerated. Hard book to read in some ways, but it talks about the imprisonment and disability in the United States and Canada, how America deals with their populations with disabilities. They imprison them. That is a serious institutional marker, scar on America, right? We imprison people who may have intellectual, mental, various disabilities, emotional disabilities, right? So that's the institutional ableism that we are dealing with. Like, how do we mitigate these problems? We don't help them. We incarcerate them, right? And then also we can talk about, that's another video, talking about media, all the different images that you see with people with disabilities. Who's seen as desirable? Who's seen as not desirable? Who's seen as able and not able in society? How many people with disabilities do we even see, right? Oh, lovely Netflix show talking the people who have ASD and they're trying to find love. I think that's one of the more positive representations of people with disabilities that I've ever seen, right? So talk about that in the description box. Also, religion, right? I'm not going to touch that right now. That'll probably be a future video, but talking about the ableism in religion. Actually, if you are expert on that, please put that in the chat. I would love to hear what books you would recommend, articles, and things that you would recommend when talking about that. So so institutional ableism. See, I'm always saying racism. We're going to talk about racism in future videos. So institutional ableism is within institutions. But now, so say if you have a hospital that in some ways may not treat people with disabilities fairly compared to their so-called typical developing peers, right? And then you have a hospital infected by ableism. But then you have a series of hospitals, right? Or you have a series of schools. So one school can be extremely ableist, and and that's another video. I'm going to talk about ableism in schools, and please check that out. But you have one school that is very ableist, where they have low expectations for people with disabilities, right? Or children with disabilities. But then you can have a whole district of that. So how does that then impact a whole district of children with disabilities? Because let me just say, the World Health Organization says every society has at least 15% of its population with a disability, right? And as I said earlier in the video, everyone will have a disability in their lifetime. So if you have an institution and a job, right? One company, and don't sue me, but let's say, throw out a company, McDonald's, one McDonald's may not hire people who have disabilities. I don't know if you do, allegedly, right? But then if that's their practice at one, that could be their practice at many, right? So you have all these McDonald's who do not hire people with disabilities. I don't know if that's true. I didn't read the research. Allegedly, I'm just using them as an example. But you do see actually some companies make it their business to hire someone with disabilities. I see, not to say they're treated well, I see Walmart, I see Trader Joe's do hire people with disabilities. And then also too, there's laws that say if you have a certain population, a certain number of people in a job, you have to hire them, right? You have to hire people with disabilities. But then that is something else. How much are they paid, right? Because do you know that you can pay people with disabilities less than minimum wage, right? And that has historical relevance in this society too. I'm going to plug this, definitely promote this book. Very good book. If you want to hear about the history of disability, there's tons of authors and dissertations that talk about this. But this book, very good book, African-American Slavery and Disability, Bodies, Property, and the Power in the Antebellum South from 1800 to 1860 by Dia Boster. Very, very good book. I wrote paper on that book. Is a very good book, and did some other research as well, talking about disability and the foundation of this country was born out of ableism, was born, of course, out of racism, white supremacy, all that, but how they treated people throughout history on plantations was extremely ableist, right? Is how your production, you were as good as how much you could produce on that plantation, right? So you had full hands, half hands, quarter hands, and how they dealt with people as they got disability. Because, oh, there's so many things I could talk about. And actually, that will be another video because, oh, I would love to talk about disability and history in this country. So these are some elements. So structurally, you have so many different things that could be coming about. So across institutions, across society, you may see the cumulative and compounded effects of ableism, right? So you may see systematic privileges amongst people who are neurotypical versus people who aren't neurotypical, right? So you may see even tons of segregation, right? So you may see segregated housing, segregated schoolings with people with disabilities, right? So you may have fewer job options, fewer services because of that. People may be very apt to cut your resources, right? So America now is debating on whether to give states rights or states privileges over federal funds for, IDEA for people with disabilities, children who are impoverished, Title I funds, and students in temporary housing. That's troublesome because these laws, we had to have these laws because of the insurmountable discrimination that people who are impoverished, who have disabilities, have been impacted, and people with different races, right, have been impacted. And now states get to pick and choose who they give their funds to. And that's troublesome because that is extremely troublesome. And then if we cut the meager money that actually goes to these populations, what will actually happen to them? And then people would say, and I'm going to end right here. A lot of people say, you are as good as how you treat your the people who are considered less than, right? Because a lot of people with disabilities in society are seen as less than. And how good of a society are you if you treat them so poorly, right? So just some things to think about. This channel is called Take the Meat, Spit Out the Bones. You may had a lot of bones in this video. I'm sure you had some meat, but take the meat that I just gave you and spit out the bones and see what you can do to advocate for people with disabilities. Because as I said again, the third time, you will be impacted by a disability in your lifetime if you haven't already. Okay, thank you so much and hope to hear from you soon and see you soon. Please get down in the description box. Tell me what you think. Like, subscribe, share, all the things. All right, I'll see you for another one. Bye.